So I'm going to share a bit about my own journey into the mental health system, the effects that psychiatric diagnosis had on me, and what it was like to decide to leave the system behind and unlearn all the stories that I was taught to believe in about myself during my, what I like to call, long career as a mental patient. And I'll then shift or expand a bit outwards to just talk about more broadly how I've tried to take my own personal experiences and use them to think strategically about how to help my fellows, how what we go through as individuals is, as so many have said before me, fundamentally political. And I'll talk a little bit about what I envision when I think about a future beyond the mental health system. So I met the mental health system as a 13-year-old kid. To anyone looking at me on the surface, I seem to have it all together. I grew up in a family that provided me with a lot of access to resources. I had a lot of privilege as a kid in an upper middle class family. And I did well in school, was a good athlete, I kind of was doing it right on the surface, but underneath my life had fallen completely apart at that time, and I was full of chaos. I was just, chaos is the best word I can think of. And really what had happened that had led me to that place was that I'd had this profound experience in front of a mirror, in front of a bathroom mirror, where I lost touch with myself. I was just staring deeper and deeper into my eyes until I saw a stranger looking back at me, and I just had this encounter with this strange girl, not knowing who she was, not knowing what she believed in, not knowing what her values were, what mattered to her. And when I came out of the experience, the best way I could make sense of it was that I didn't have a real self. I was just this fake programmed performer without anything that was truly mine. And so I eventually just couldn't handle holding that secret in because I didn't tell anyone about it. Something in me knew not to tell anyone about it. And I ended up beginning to really act out at home and angry, cutting myself, thinking about death, slamming doors. Understandably, my parents eventually didn't know what to do anymore, and they did what so many parents are taught to do when their child is struggling. They sent me to a therapist who soon sent me to a psychiatrist who diagnosed me in an hour with bipolar disorder, telling me that we have this understanding that anger and irritability are symptoms of mania in juvenile bipolar disorder, and despair, symptoms of depression. Here's Depakote and Prozac, and that was the beginning for me. And though I tried my best to resist the diagnosis, at the time, that fiery young kid that I was knew it was bullshit. I knew this is a fundamental insult to my humanity. How dare you tell me I'm broken? No matter how much my instincts knew that then, that's what I call seed of brokenness was in me. And so though I tried to avoid the meds and I avoided doctors a good bit in high school, I remained stuck in this performer role that I never felt like I escaped. And I ended up at a really good college, the one that you're always meant to strive to go to. Begins with an H, it's in Massachusetts, US. And the H word, I won't say it out loud. And thinking, maybe this is all a joke and I really will be happy if I can just get to a place like Harvard, and this idea that I'm fake and a fraud, it'll all dissipate and I'll just feel normal, I'll feel happy, and I get there and nothing felt okay. I just wanted to die. And at that point, I was just so overwhelmed by my pain, and I was so afraid that that seed of brokenness that shrink had planted in me blossomed. And I became very quickly a full-on psychiatric patient. And I see now that really I was seeking relief. I was seeking a sense of understanding of what I was going through. I was seeking someone else to take the load off of me, because I had tried as best I could to figure it out myself, and I just kept seeming to fall more and more apart. And so when I went back to that psychiatrist of my own volition at the age of 18, that initial meeting where he did confirm yes, you're bipolar. These things you're describing that you're doing, you know, at my fall in college, I stayed up until 4 in the morning, deconstructing space and time, and like writing poetry that was all about now nothing's real. You know, that plus the self-injury and the thoughts of death. Yes, you know, this all confirms what that initial doctor told you, and we have new medicines that have come on the market since you were 14. Don't worry, you're gonna be okay, I'm gonna help you. And that sense of relief I felt in that moment, I cried tears of joy. When he put that diagnosis back on me, I have an explanation. This isn't my fault. I'm not a pathetic failure of a person, I'm sick. And I now have this promise of this promise of a solution, this therapy, these meds. There's hope for me. I don't have to kill myself. And so I do think, as others have touched on, that diagnosis can play a really powerful role when you're just overwhelmed by pain. And that was certainly the case for me. I also felt like I belonged too. I think that's a big part of it. I wasn't just alone anymore with my experiences. I realized there's this whole world of other mentally ill people like me. I belong somewhere. I'm a part of something. Yeah, I really got into becoming a good patient, and I can look back now and see that it became my purpose. Became my sense of meaning for who I was and how I fit in, was as sick and broken. And if this is what I am, then I want to be good at it. And I got really good at it, and I kept making diaries and rated everything, and I just would keep my doctors updated on all of it, and I always took my meds as prescribed, and I knew, you know, eventually when I began to spend more time in psychiatric hospitals, I would just have my bag packed, and I'd say, I'm ready to go, and I think it's so funny when I think back to it, because I never actually felt helped. I never actually got better. Actually, the very opposite happened. The deeper I went into the mental health system, the more I turned my life over to it, the more I let it shape my sense of self, the more it all fell apart. And even though I somehow managed to graduate from college, and to this day, I don't know how, because I don't remember anything. I was very, very medicated, and every day was, for the last 3 years of it especially, was, do I kill myself today or not? But though I somehow made it through, by the time I was in my mid-20s, I had no friends. My physical health was I constantly had issues. I couldn't work. I had to rely on my family to take care of me, and I was lucky enough and privileged enough that I had a family who could take care of me. Death was my closest companion. I thought about it every day, and it kept me alive for a long time, knowing that I had my suicide as my one final act. And so, despite all of that, I still unquestioningly, unwaveringly believed in this helping system and went to it over and over and over again, went to it deeper and deeper. And at some point along the way, they started to tell me, it looks like you're treatment resistant, because we have all these sophisticated medicines we're giving you, essentially is what they said. And I was going to some of the top psychiatric hospitals in the country, seeing leading experts on this diagnosis, that diagnosis, and nothing was helping. And so rather than all of us step back and say, maybe we should reassess what we're doing here, it was, no, you're just so sick. You're just so broken that these amazing treatments we have aren't touching this progression of your disease. And I believed that, and eventually reached the point where death did become the only logical conclusion and solution to my life. And at the age of 27, after having tried it all the treatments, all the therapies, all the meds, I very calmly and peacefully and in the most grounded way I've ever been in my life, decided to kill myself. And I look back on my suicide with deep respect, because it made perfect sense to this, the most logical action I could have taken given the story I was believing about who I was. And as Claire so poignantly and powerfully spoke about earlier, the stories we tell ourselves are really, really important. So, I obviously didn't succeed, quote unquote, at killing myself. And yeah, for a couple of years afterwards, I every day thought about how I'd failed at this as well. But eventually, I did realize that maybe the story I was telling myself wasn't true, and that process for me began in 2010. And for a long time, I thought that my catalyst for this, in the years I've been speaking and writing, for a long time I thought my catalyst was finding a particular book that I'll get to in a minute. But the more time that's passed between me and my psychiatrization, the more I've realized a few things actually happened before that really got this unlearning, waking up process going for me. And there were 3 seemingly small events to me at the time that I didn't realize were actually leading me to have a profound aha moment. And each of them involved the dark side of the mental health system that I had never actually really seen before, because I'd always been a good patient, and that's force and coercion. I, through a long story I won't get into now, was escorted by security guards to a psychiatric ward at one point and given the so-called choice of going voluntarily or involuntarily. So I chose voluntary, but that experience really stirred something up in me, because I realized they have the right to strip me of fresh air. They have the right to keep me from going where I want to go. Next, I had an experience on that unit where they made me take a drug that I didn't want to take. And because I was so psychiatrized at the time, even though something in me didn't want to take it, I actually didn't have the, whatever you might want to call it, to say no verbally. So though I was a bit, maybe was a bit unhappy with the doctors, I never said no, and I took it. I was lucky enough not to have it put in my body against my will, but it wasn't a choice. And the third experience that really got me going was when my therapist at the time decided to call the police to do a wellness check on me when I slept through an appointment because I was so sedated. So those 3 things happened, and everything, they forced me to come up against everything that I believed in through all those years, that the system was here to help me, that these professionals only had my best interests in mind, that I was an autonomous, free person making these choices. I realized that none of it was true, and that this helping system was actually a controlling system, and that it had taken me all these years to realize it because I'd never said no. And that got me questioning. It got me stepping back, and I began to wonder about other things that maybe I believed in that I hadn't questioned before. And I began to think especially about my relationship to these drugs that I've been on since I was a kid, realizing that I actually didn't know who I was off of them. I didn't know which emotions were mine or the meds, and my personality, is this me, or am I being shaped by these meds? And these questions began to keep me up at night, and given that I was at that time in a pretty, don't know what word to use to describe it. I'll just say what my day-to-day life looked like then. I was attending an outpatient program at the Borderline Center, it was affectionately called, where we borderlines would just pile on into the little meeting room every morning, sit around and talk about how borderline we were, and go to our mentalization groups and our mood regulation groups, and be so diligent about checking in on our emotional lability with each other. And, oh man, that was a time, but I'm actually quite grateful for it, because as I began to ask these questions, there I found myself in the most degrading, dehumanizing, demoralizing setting that I possibly could have been in. And so I'm quite grateful for it, actually, because it made it all quite obvious. When I began to ask questions, it was all quite obvious that I was in an environment that was stripping me of my humanity, and that had trained me in such a profound way to loathe myself and see myself as this defective, not just brain, but personality as well. And so when this question of my meds and who am I and who could I be off of them began to circle in my mind, I'd sit in these groups just fixating on it. And I eventually began to bring it up with my treatment team, my psychopharmacologist in particular, and for a couple of months they said, you know, let's not rock the boat, let's just come back to it next month. And it eventually dawned on me that this is my body. Why do I keep waiting another month to start coming off of these drugs? What am I doing? And I finally said in this meeting, I'm going to do it, and will you help me? And I can't remember exactly how he put it, but he made it clear that he was not supportive of the decision, but couldn't stop me. And so I proceeded to come off of the 5 drugs I was on at the time, which was, I remember thinking of as this sophisticated medicine regimen. That the word sophisticated, does anyone else have that put on their polypharmacy cocktail? I don't know why in the States, sophisticated. But I was brought off of these 5 drugs in 5 months, which I now know is basically cold turkey, but at the time was way too slow for me because I had become convinced that I needed to find out who I could be off of these drugs. I wasn't even questioning my diagnoses at that point. I just wanted to find out what my baseline mentally ill state was. And so I did it, and it was the hardest thing I ever did to come off of those drugs, especially as fast as I came off. And I say that having had access to basically every resource I could have needed, given the life that I was born into, the color of my skin, the economic class that my parents were in. I had access to every possible resource I could need to come off of these drugs, and it was the hardest thing I ever did. But I had this beacon that I was going towards, this why that was driving me to come off. I needed to find out who I was off of these drugs, and so I kept going. I was learning everything that Lucy spoke about earlier, that this notion that these diagnoses are these medical conditions is not rooted in evidence, it's invalid. And so my whole worldview was being uprooted and turned on its head. Everything about who I'd been through the most formative years of my life had been dependent on being mentally ill. Every relationship that I was in was oriented around, I'm this sick person who's like trying to fit in. My whole body, the shape of my body, the size of my body, my body's overall health, energy, it was all being shaped by the drugs, which I was on because of the diagnoses. It was just, I was calling everything into question. And then I found, along the way, a book that would be my catalyst, called Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker, that I'm sure most, if not all of you in the room are aware of. And that book, in a nutshell, its thesis is that if you look at what the data is actually telling us about the long-term use of these drugs, you find that the truth is quite a different story than what we've been led to believe, and that actually these drugs aren't as safe as effective as we thought they were, and they're actually leading to increased rates of disability due to so-called mental illness. And when I read that book, and I thought back to the previous decade of my life, from the moment I really embraced that diagnosis as a freshman in college until then, and I thought about all the losses, the loss of my health, of my identity, of my friendships, of my ability to work, of my sexuality, of my creativity, all of it. It dawned on me in that moment, what all along it hasn't been treatment-resistant mental illness, it's been the fucking treatment. And, you know, I of course see now that it's much more nuanced and that there were so many other factors at play that were leading me into these dark struggles, but it was profound for me, and that was all I needed to keep going through the darkness. I'm going to move quickly through the kind of reclamation process I went through as I went through this process of critical education and like teaching myself about the diagnoses and the drugs and all of that. Eventually, I came off of them. I left the professionals behind because at some point I kind of realized, why am I paying you to tell me things about myself? Just eventually, for me, became unnecessary. And at some point, I realized what I've been through is big here, and I need to do something with this. I cannot just sit with these realizations I've had. I have to take action. And I began to write and speak about what I went through. And I actually really, when I look back now, I see I began a process of reclaiming my story from the mental health system and finding my own way of telling it. And eventually I began to support other people in the same process, and eventually I was given this amazing opportunity with some of my colleagues to start this nonprofit organization that we call Inner Compass Initiative. And the name really comes from this idea that within us is this innate wisdom, this guide that each of us has to move us through life, but that we lose touch with through for all different kinds of reasons, but certainly when we get psychiatrized, we're taught to not trust in ourselves. We're taught to ignore our instincts, to rely on other people to tell us how to live our lives. And so the name is really rooted in that. And our mission at this stage in the game is to help people make more informed choices regarding psychiatric drugs, psychiatric diagnoses, how psychiatric drugs are researched and marketed, all of that. And we've built at our main nonprofit website a section of resources that help facilitate that process, and we've also built the Withdrawal Project, which is really aimed at helping people make as informed choices as they possibly can about how to come off of psychiatric drugs as safely and successfully as they're able to. And that was information that I didn't have when I came off of my drugs so quickly. And we have a lot of resources on the withdrawal process. We have a step-by-step companion guide to withdrawal that helps people teach themselves the nitty-gritty of how to actually taper, like pictures and making liquid mixtures and all of that. Everything's free. I believe this information should be a fundamental right to all people that should not be profited off of. And the part of our organization that I'm most excited about and that I'll end with is we've built 2 networking platforms, one at the Inner Compass Initiative website and the other at the Withdrawal Project, that aim to help people find each other in their own communities. Because of course I realized eventually that I'm far from the only one who's been through this big thing that I've been through. And when you think about the numbers of us out there, the millions and millions and millions of us who are engaged in some way with the mental health system, who are on these drugs, who are questioning, who are having something deep inside us and say, this isn't the way it's meant to be. There's so many of us out there, but how do we find each other? For all we know, our neighbor 2 buildings down is wanting to come off drugs when you yourself are wanting to come off. How do you know that each of you is there? And so we've built these networking platforms so that people can find each other. And really the part of my talk that I don't have as much time to get into, but that my workshop's all about is how do we take our own experiences and channel them into action in the here and now that can really today, tomorrow, begin to create spaces and pathways out of the mental health system. Because I think oftentimes it can be disempowering when you think, oh, these laws need to change and these, high policies, and we're never gonna, pharmaceutical industry is too powerful, managed care is too powerful. But the reality is that in this moment, right now, we have so much power within us and between us to help ourselves and each other outside of the system. And it's far from, it's simple, it's not easy, but whether it's starting a meetup once a week at your local coffee shop to have like critical discussions and you read a new article each week, or you watch an interview of someone and then you talk about it, or you start a mutual support group at someone's house for people coming off meds, or you organize events like this. I mean, this is like amazing and powerful and life-changing. A conversation can change someone's life. My first conversation with Bob Whitaker after I read his book, when he looked at me in the eye and he said, "You've been through something big," that changed the course of my life. And you never know who you might reach, who you might touch through your words, through your art, through your kindness. And so there's much that I'm not able to get into here about this vision for what this future could look like. I mean, I will say I don't really know the answer at all. When I say beyond the mental health system, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how to get there. But I do think in the here and now, at the grassroots, there's so much we can be doing. In closing, I'll just say, we need to reclaim our pain. We need to reclaim ourselves from this system that is only as powerful as it is because we've given it that power, because we've come to believe in the story that we don't have what we need within us to be with someone who's thinking about suicide. Oh, I'm not a professional. You should call the emergency services line. That's a disempowering story. And within each of us, we have tremendous power to be with each other. And so I guess I'm just putting out this call to all of us here, and this is, of course, the spirit of this event, that it's time to reclaim our pain, our ability to be with each other, our ability to sit with things that scare us, which is the most radical thing you can do in this consumerist society that's constantly telling you to seek relief, buy this, drink this, eat this, take this. To just be with the darkness, to be with the fear, to be with the pain is fundamentally radical, and the more we can create the space to do it together, the more this future beyond the mental health system will become slowly clearer to us. So I look forward to connecting with all of you today, and thank you so much for listening to me.